Hey there, it's Emma Murphy, and you're watching the Change Source TV. This is the place to be to learn more about leading and managing organisational change. Today I'll be sharing with you how to build a communications campaign to effectively support your change programme. I'll be sharing with you 5 steps to get you started with planning your communications campaign so that you can effectively communicate about the proposed changes. And in turn, you'll be able to increase awareness and engagement amongst your impacted stakeholders. So please stay tuned. There's nothing worse than seeing a change being implemented in an organisation where there isn't a clear communications campaign to support the change vision. Rumours and false information can be extremely damaging when trying to implement change. So the sooner that you can communicate clear and relevant information to your audience, the better. According to best practice research, you need to communicate your messages at least 7 times in 7 different ways before they sink in. And especially nowadays when there's so much noise going on within an organisation, you really need to make sure that you can grab your audience's attention early on and continue to hold their attention throughout the change project. So now let's take a look at the 5 steps to create a communications campaign. Step 1. Build a communication strategy. Firstly, let's consider the communication campaign's objectives. So what exactly are you trying to achieve? For example, it could be to build stakeholder support, it could be to increase awareness, it could be to minimise resistance to the proposed changes. So you need to think about what the key objectives are so that you can then plan out your entire campaign and build your key messages around those objectives. This will also help you to measure the effectiveness of the communication campaign once it's completed. Secondly, you need to consider who are the internal and external stakeholder groups that you need to communicate with about the proposed changes. Okay, so next you need to consider what the key messages are that you need to communicate. And then you need to consider how will you actually communicate those messages. So for example, which channels will you use to communicate? You then need to think about when you will communicate those messages and who will deliver them. And finally, it's really important to think about whether you want to create a brand and a theme for your project. Because nowadays, as I mentioned before, there's so much noise going on within an organisation. How do you capture the attention of your audience and keep them engaged and interested? So perhaps creating a brand and generating some excitement around your project might be a great idea. So now, in the next steps, I'm going to go into more detail on some of the key elements that I've just discussed as part of creating your communication strategy. Step 2, determine your message content. This is a very important step because this is the time when you really need to think about what exactly it is that you want to communicate to your impacted audience. So for example, when you're first announcing a change, you need to make sure that you're clearly explaining what are the drivers for this change. Perhaps it's external, perhaps it's changes in the marketplace, perhaps you need to compete globally, for example, or perhaps it's an internal change that you need to reduce costs or you need to re-engineer some of your processes, for example. You also need to communicate what are the expected benefits and outcomes of your proposed change. It's important to remember that when you first announce a change, the majority of people will be thinking, what's in it for me? Why is this happening? I'm not sure about this. What does this mean? So it's really important that you try to preempt as many of these questions and concerns that stakeholders might have so that you're ready and prepared to address these questions as they come up. It's important to remember that people can't take in too much information at one time when you first announce a change. So it's really important that you get the most important messages out there from the beginning and that you're as clear and transparent and open as you possibly can be so that you can start to build trust amongst your stakeholders. For example, it really isn't advisable to bombard your employees with too much recommend trying to stagger the information around key milestones throughout the change programme so that you give them small chunks of information that they can remember. And finally, you need to think about how you can give the employees information about how they will be supported throughout the change. Also let them know how they can provide feedback, how they can offer suggestions, and how they can actually get involved with this change programme and start getting them to become owners of the change as soon as possible. Step 3, identify communications channels. Okay, so when you're thinking about which communications channels to use, just remember that people are really busy nowadays. So try to think about how you can grab people's attention in different ways as well. So be innovative and be creative. For example, instead of an email, perhaps you can create a short comic strip that can be sent within an email that depicts a scenario. Or perhaps you could host an informal event where you invite some actors and they can conduct a role play which shows what life might be like in the future. So a typical day with the changes implemented. This is really helpful to try and get the employees' minds into the future so they can really picture how their life will be different when the proposed changes are implemented. Other things you can do are perhaps create an awards scheme. So you could have Project Oscars so that you're rewarding people throughout the project. This again will make people more engaged, they'll want to be a part of it, and especially when they see they're being rewarded for putting in extra effort being involved in this project. It's a really great way to show your appreciation for your employees. Another thing you could do is perhaps to organise a World Cafe. Again, this is a nice way to bring together different groups of people within your organisation to discuss key topics related to the change. And after 10 minutes on a table, you ask employees to move around so they get to discuss topics with different people. Again, it's a great way to build networks within the organisation, get people collaborating and communicating, and normally really great ideas come about that you probably wouldn't have had if you hadn't got people together in that room to focus specifically on working through different problems or challenges related to your change. Step 4. Involve key stakeholders in delivering communications content. So nowadays, people are really busy in their organisations. There's so much going on all the time. So how can you capture their attention and keep their attention throughout the project? You need to think about who are your key stakeholders that you want to deliver these messages. For example, your primary sponsor, your senior leadership team, your middle management layer, and perhaps you also have some change champions that can be involved with disseminating messages. What's really important is to build trust amongst your stakeholder audience, because what's really important is delivering the right message at the right time by the right people to ensure that you can increase engagement and build trust throughout your audience. But you also need to consider, are the people delivering your messages prepared to do this? Do they have the relevant information and tools they need to deliver these messages? Perhaps they need some additional support in terms of communication skills. Okay, so once you've finalised everything, you'll then need to draw up a schedule which details out the key communications activities, the audiences, the channels that you'll use, whether you need any budget, and who's the owner of delivering that message. This is really important so that you'll be able to monitor and track your progress throughout the project. Step 5. Measure your results. So once you've planned out your communications in detail, I suggest that you develop some robust measurement mechanisms to help you gauge how effective your communications have been. For example, you can gather employee feedback. Perhaps you could conduct surveys every quarter to understand how much of the information that you're sharing is actually going in and how much people remember and understand from what you're saying. You'll also be able to report your progress to leadership. especially if you have a budget that you're using. They'll want to see some sort of return on investment for creating a communications campaign. And if you're monitoring and tracking it effectively, you'll be able to easily adapt it and make changes to make sure it fits your needs going forward. I suggest conducting some sort of communications review every quarter so that you don't go too long without really understanding whether the information that you're disseminating to the organisation is actually working and is actually driving engagement and is actually educating people about the changes. Well, there you have it. 5 steps to creating a communication campaign to support your change effort. I just want to say thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoyed watching this, please do subscribe to my channel below. And if you'd like some more information, please go ahead and visit www.thechangetools.com, where you'll find a lot more articles about change management, tools and templates that can support you with your change efforts. Thanks for watching. Okay.
I think there was a snort in there somewhere, was there?
Yeah, I hope that was after you cut.
No, I don't think
Really?
it was.
I might have to do that again then.
Let me just check it, because it sure sounded like a snort.
There's nothing worse than seeing a change being